So, it appears the Chicago Blackhawks have started to get a head start towards making trades in the 2021-2022 season. We've had multiple insiders go out there and talk about a few names on the Hawks, and because we have ourselves a few suggestions from other outlets as to who could be potential suitors, I thought it'd be cool to go out there and talk about the Blackhawks, just go over some of the names that have been involved in these trade discussions over here. Last time we made a video about the Blackhawks, it went over extraordinarily well in the comments. I'm being very sarcastic, by the way. You guys flamed me for that Alex Nylander video. But we have ourselves what is another thing to talk about when it comes to some young boding stars, I guess, in the National Hockey League. One of them at least, and the other being a potential injury, retiree, LTIR situation over here. So, starting out with the LTIR name, this is what Frank Saravelli said on Twitter. We mentioned this in our mini icebreaker segment on our Daily Faceoff show today. The Chicago Blackhawks are actively trying to move Andrew Shaw's contract. It's LTIR, $3.9 million AAV, and the contract is insured. Then there also is a little thing in the tweet about the Hockey Hall of Fame, but that's not really what we're talking about here in this video. Andrew Shaw is on the block, but not really for the same reasons that Andrew Shaw has been on the block before, wherein he was seen as a valuable, speedy kind of depth forward in the National Hockey League. He is mostly just going to be treated now as a potential LTIR situation to help out any team that is out there that needs cap relief. Andrew Shaw is 30 years old. He's making $3.9 million, as the tweet went out there and said, and he's making that until 2021-2022, which is this season. He's officially retired, so of course he's not going to play anymore, but the contract still exists, the contract is still on the books, and the Blackhawks would actually go out there and see some relief should they free themselves up of that $3.9 million AAV. Now, I'm not really too sure if the Blackhawks are going to be one of the better teams in the Central this season, so who really knows what their plans are going forward should they free up that money? Maybe it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, you would rather have that $3.9 million than not have it, and you would rather be able to get some assets for this kind of guy than not have to get those assets in general too. If a team goes out there and tries to pull off the Tampa Bay kind of thing with Anders Nielsen and Marian Gaborik like they had last season, then be my guest, I guess. It's still within the rule books, even though it is kind of a weird little loophole, I guess you could say. Is it even really a loophole? It's just kind of taking advantage of what's written in the fine print, I guess. But still, it is a viable option for any team that's looking to go out there and maybe try to take advantage of the guys they have on their team. Maybe acquiring a guy like an Andrew Shaw could be the final piece that they need to go out there and, I don't know, maybe acquire another depth forward, because the LTIR space that Shaw would provide would be a pretty beneficial addition to their cap structure. But Andrew Shaw, as we know, retired player, Montreal Canadiens, Chicago Blackhawks, he has had a pretty good history in the National Hockey League. It's just going to be interesting seeing where he goes from here. However, we have ourselves another name that has been on the trade block, according to several NHL insiders. It is Dylan Strome. Now, we have already spoken about Strome. The video we made was literally like a week ago, so go ahead and watch this video if you want to go ahead and see the entire story, you know, how everything has gone down with Dylan Strome, how he went from one of the best players in the CHL behind Connor McDavid to a third overall draft pick with first-line potential, to an Arizona Coyotes pick that really didn't work out, to a Chicago Blackhawks acquiree who was really good at the beginning. He was just under a point per game, but who really kind of fizzled out towards this year. He had 17 points in 40 games played this most recent season, and this year he's going out there as not even really a lock to be a top guy in their lineup. Take a look at this. This is from Spectre's Hockey yesterday on TSN. Pierre LeBrun reported the Chicago Blackhawks have a surplus of centers, and there is a good chance that Dylan Strome could be traded within the next week or two. He said there are some teams that are kicking tires on the 24-year-old center. We also had ourselves some more things over here. What Elliot Friedman said on Sportsnet. He also believes that Strome could be a trade candidate. Head coach Jeremy Colleton is talking about him as a fourth liner, and that is not a place that he will thrive. We also had Daily Faceoff, so Frank Saravelli go out there and say the same thing. The Blackhawks aren't facing pressure to move Strome, however, they're actively listening to offers and considering their options. So, you want to go out there and talk about the validity of these things going on. It's Pierre LeBrun of TSN, Friedman of Sportsnet, and you have Daily Faceoff Frank Saravelli as well. It's the big three coming out here from the three pretty much just standard networks of hockey information that come out nowadays, saying that Strome is indeed being listened to when it comes to trade offers. And again, this entire thing was explored in the previous Dylan Strome video, the What Happened to Dylan Strome video, how he went from the really good player he was in junior to what he is now. How there's an entire roster debacle with the Chicago Blackhawks that doesn't really allow Strome to be one of the guys that we thought could drive the ship. He's likely to be a bottom six forward on this team just because of the depth the Blackhawks have nowadays. And if you know anything about Dylan Strome, you know that that's not really a role where he would likely succeed. He's not really physical enough. He's not really the best motor out there when it comes to board battles and defensive play. He's a guy who has a lot of skill, but who doesn't really showcase that skill as often as you would like to see it. However, we have ourselves a more in-depth look on the Spectre's hockey article where this Dylan Strome stuff comes from as to what teams could potentially be good suitors for the former third overall pick. The Bruins, the Buffalo Sabres, the Columbus Blue Jackets, Red Wings, Wild, Montreal Canadiens, Sens, and Kraken could be among the suitors. Strome is in the final season of a 2-year contract with a $3 million AAV. However, that could prove expensive for some cap-strapped teams. Now, I don't want to go over and discuss every team in this situation over here, because it is kind of interesting how it goes down. Buffalo, for me, is the most interesting one for sure, mostly because of the draft capital they have had in the past few seasons. They had 2nd overall 2015 Jack Eichel. If they acquire 3rd overall 2015 Dylan Strome, it would be just like that Carolina Hurricanes kind of thing, where they have the 2nd and 3rd overall picks from 2018. However, for Buffalo, okay, we know Jack Eichel is not going to be around for a while, so maybe you replace the 2nd overall pick with a 3rd overall pick instead from the same draft. There are some other teams, though, that are mentioned over here. Detroit is an interesting one, mostly because, okay, they're one of my favorite teams, firstly, but secondly, they also have themselves a pretty good track record when it comes to taking guys that really haven't worked out well, despite having higher ceilings and higher expectations, and trying them out, you know? Sometimes they're able to mold these players into guys that are a lot more useful than they had been on their previous teams. Other times it doesn't work out. The example that comes to my mind right away is Brendan Perlini, who also was a former Coyote and Chicago Blackhawk like Strome, who went over to Detroit last season. He really wasn't all too great, and now he is on Edmonton, absolutely tearing things up in the preseason. However, there are indeed some other names that could be used in that kind of modeled over there for Detroit. You take a look at the Minnesota Wild. Hey, they're a team that could use themselves a pretty big skilled center like Dylan Strome. Maybe you try to play him in your middle six because, hey, is he an upgrade on Victor Rask? He probably is. I don't know, maybe? I'm not really too sure, actually. That's your prerogative to tell me in the comments if that is the case. Boston, I don't really know if they could afford a Dylan Strome, but we do know they like their big physical players. It's just, Dylan Strome isn't physical enough to me to justify that kind of role with the Boston Bruins. Like, if you're going to acquire a 3rd, maybe somewhat middle six kind of center, I'd rather see John Beecher tried out in that role than Dylan Strome of all people. Plus, the cap really makes things a little bit more difficult as well, as we had mentioned. Then you have yourselves a few other teams here. Montreal is always in the market for centers, but they don't really need to be anymore. With Nick Suzuki, Christian Dvorak, Jake Evans, and Adam Brooks, they pretty much don't really need any more centers, so I don't want to go out there and say that Montreal would be one of the top teams in that conversation anymore. And besides, what exactly is there that the Canadiens could give up, that the Blackhawks would see value in, and at the same time would not actually hurt the Canadiens in giving up? There aren't really too many options unless you're talking about prospects and picks and all that in which I don't really know if the Blackhawks would want too many more of those because it looks like they're starting to make a little bit of a competitive jump. Finally, though, the Columbus Blue Jackets were also mentioned here as well. They are an interesting team. They could use a center. They have themselves Cole Sillinger coming up, though. So if you really want to go out there and say you need even more center acquisitions, maybe you could have Dylan Strome, but they're really happy with their shiny new toys, Chinikov, and of course, Sillinger as well. They've got a lot of good excitement going on in the fan base over there. But to end off this video, let's go over a quote here from Stan Bowman when it comes to what Dylan Strome is in the long-term future for the Blackhawks. This was asked by Ben Pope. The full quote is pretty long, but pretty much at the end he says it right here. It's probably more circumstantial than anything, what Dylan Strome's role is going to be with the Blackhawks going forward, especially with the rest of the guys on the team already. Talk to me in the comments, what do you think about Andrew Shaw being on the trade block for his LTIR money, as well as Dylan Strome too being explored in the trade market because there are just too many gosh darn forwards, and some of them have already proved themselves to be a bit better than Strome on the Blackhawks so far. Talk to me in the comments, what do you think? I hope you enjoyed. This was Rosén, and bye.